aspect, it angers me because adults doing the perversions that their mind and their sinful desires want, it's one thing, but to impose this on children and the long lasting effect of this.
You get depression, you get anxiety, you get high levels of stress, you get suicides because you constantly fitting yourself in a box where God hasn't created you to be. Welcome again to the Theology Alive podcast. Like we used to do when we used to be live with our just audio podcast, we used to throw Isaac under the bus. And so if you remember, we said we're going to release our episodes regularly, and we haven't. If you've been wondering why, it is this man's fault. Isaac Martiniano.
I'm just going to say that this is going to come back to bite you. I'm just going to say it now.
Yes.
Yeah. It is my fault, but I am not sorry about it.
All right. So look, we do accept hate mail. And so if you'd like to send some hate mail, you can send it to office. I'm joking. I'm joking. All right. So maybe to start off again, this morning or afternoon or whenever you watch this, what's on your mind, bro? You have been resting. You have been away on leave.
And that's the reason why I'm not sorry about it. It's not like I abandoned the podcast.
I mean, you did, but that's not the
point. So what's on my mind? Is I've been on leave, just resting with my family for about a week and a half, and just resting, enjoying some of God's nature, hiking the family, spending time together, and not worrying about things, and just spending time together. And for me, it's been such a time of, again, refreshing, and it reminds me of how wise God is in saying we do need rest, because the mind becomes clearer as you spend time with God. Things, new ideas come up, and you feel revigorated, not just like, and so it was a good time to rest, a good time to connect with my wife and my children again. It is one of the things that also highlights how much sometimes I miss of, especially my children. They're growing, they small, but now seeing Luca speak so many new words and saying what happened.
That's so cute.
No, and dog.
Oh, wow.
So it was a great time of rest, and I'm ready and feel good to get back at work and continue for the rest of the year and continue to do what God has called me to do. So
I read an article just before you went on leave. Maybe it was when you were on leave, and it was just talking about how there was a generation of pastors who overworked themselves. They worked hard and they worked long hours, and the consequences of that was they weren't home. They were just always away. Everything was an emergency. And so the pastors coming after them sort of model their ministries around that, in that to be a good pastor, you must be you must overwork yourself. You must always be busy. You must always be available. And you must answer every call. And the article basically was saying, as pastors, we need to remind ourselves that we will never finish. Like the
work never ends.
We never get to the end of day like, oh, okay, I'm done. There's because of the nature of what we do, there's always something. There's always somebody to see. There's always somebody to visit. There's always something to prepare. And so always something to read, always
Yeah.
something to listen to, always a
Yes.
controversy that is coming up that we need to be aware of.
Yeah.
And so we never really will be finished. And so the argument he was making was we need to develop the habit of doing what we can with the hours we have, and then affording ourselves opportunities of rest.
Yeah.
And his argument was as much as we teach good doctrine, we also need to be aware that in the good doctrine we teach, there is the theology of rest.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, God created us to need rest. And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
the truth is we will never be as productive as we could be if
Sure.
we rested.
Yeah.
If we
Yeah.
don't rest,
Yeah.
that is.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really a good reminder that, and it shows that it's helpful to rest so that you have more strength and more clarity to go on. So that's been what's on my mind. What's
Sure.
on your mind?
So I've been preparing for a sermon series that we started this past Sunday night on worldliness. And man, it's been a difficult one because as I prepared it, I tried to almost prepare the whole map. So I have almost the roadmap to where I want to go from the beginning to the end. And so I was thinking of, what I'm gonna preach on week 2, week 3, week 4, and I'm obviously reading, I'm listening, I'm checking the scriptures to see, what do the scriptures say about worldliness and why is worldliness a topic that we need to preach to our people at Central. And whilst I was preparing, man, I got convicted, bro.
Sure.
So I spend a lot of hours on Twitter. I realized because
X.
on
Second time,
dude, clearly I have a problem. I need to repent.
Yeah.
So
That's why you were convicted.
it's probably why. That's probably why.
Yeah.
So I was convicted by not necessarily what I was consuming on X, but it's part of it. But more on why am I on X? So initially, my reason for being on X is, I feel like I have my finger on the pulse. There's a lot of
That's
theological.
where the Times Square is, where the discussions.
Exactly.
You don't see that anywhere else.
Exactly. And so, for example, this last week, I have no idea what's happening. I don't know if is there a new fad? Is there beef between Paul Washer and somebody else? Is James White fighting somebody?
Did John MacArthur say something else?
I have no idea. And so this week of preparation, I then realized that I have been spending mindless hours on Twitter. And I haven't been mindful of what I was consuming and why I'm on there. And so by definition, I've been worldly. I've been just consuming worldly content, not guarding my mind, not guarding my heart. And so I've been very vulnerable to being attacked and discipled by the world. So much so that, the as you continue scrolling, the algorithm picks up, different things that you pause on and you read. And so it keeps feeding you with more of that stuff.
Sure.
And so the more I check some of the things that people are tweeting, I'm like, I'm not interested in this. Where on earth did this come from? It's because of I was spending mindless hours on Twitter, and I was just consuming the things of the world without guarding my mind and guarding my heart. And so it really was a trap for me. Yeah. And so I had to eventually make the call to say, man, I'm gonna uninstall. And it was actually I just closed my laptop. I just gone home and I was carrying Malachi and I was putting him to sleep. And as I was carrying him, I was just thinking, I need to delete X. I need to delete X. I need to delete X. But I've had this conversation myself before, but I never do it.
Yeah.
And so as I was carrying, I'm like, I know I won't do it. So I had to just pull the phone out of my pocket and I had to delete X. The driving principle for me was I keep telling people if your right hand causes you to sin, you need to chop it off. If your eye causes you to sin, you need to pluck it out. But there were things that I was protecting, justifying it with spiritual reasons. Yeah. And though the initial purpose of me being on X was a spiritual one, it then became a worldly one. And so because now it's been infiltrated and contaminated, I needed to cut it off. So what's on my mind? God convicted me, and I have deleted Twitter.
Sure. Wow. That's a I don't want to say a big decision, but it's great to hear just your obedience, and just I think we sometimes don't recognize that the call to follow Christ means to obey and to yield to
Sure.
His will, right?
Sure.
And sometimes we can defend and make up all kinds of arguments and why not do it, but obedience is better than sacrifice.
Sure.
Yeah, that's great. Bro.
Sure.
That's great.
So
I'm
yeah,
looking forward to the series.
yeah. Listen, part one is already out. I'm not plugging myself, but if you haven't listened to it, you can go listen to part one, and then you can listen to the next 3 that is to follow. And so yeah, that's what's on my mind. So on this episode of the Theology Alive podcast, we would like to do a part 2 of our last episode. Now, you will notice that we aren't in Pride Month anymore, and so to title the podcast Pride Month seems a little bit silly. However, both Isaac and I were convinced that there's so much to say on this topic of pride. And like with the sermon, we know once we have done Pride Month on the podcast, we can't really circle back to it. And so we really wanted to come back and sort of say the things we didn't get to say in the last podcast, and really just get it out the way, as it were, to really be as clear as we can just on this topic.
Yeah, I think there's always so much to say, and also maybe to go a little bit more in detail, and even explore what does it look practically, for Christians as we face this all around us, and so I think it will be helpful for us to go a little bit deeper in a sense. At the same time, we know that we're probably not going to cover everything. We're not doing like a 6-hour podcast or something like that. Yeah. But I think it will really be beneficial for us to touch on a few aspects that we haven't spoken on before.
And so, like, we do want to circle back on where we were last week, and sort of then pick it up today and move forward with it. Last week we really tried to narrow it down to an issue on identity. And when I say last week, I mean the last episode. And we realized that a lot of the tugging and the pulling and the struggling and the conflict is really on this issue of identity.
Right.
Who really am I?
Right.
And we really wanted to stress the point that if you want to know who you are, if you want to get a clearer picture of who are you meant to be, we want to encourage you to go to God. You know, in youth and in our student ministry, and sometimes even from the pulpit, we encourage people to, think about daily things that you use. If your phone is broken, I mean, I once was an Apple user, and now I'm an Android user. And if my phone is broken, where do I go? I need to take it to the company that services my phone, because they know how the phone operates. And so when my iPhone started malfunctioning, I took it to iStore, and they're the ones that told me that I need to pay this exorbitant amount of money to fix my phone. And so it's just sitting in my car. And so the point I'm trying to make is, as you try to discover and try to figure out who are you, it's not helpful to ask for the fellow creatures about who you are. Yeah. Go to the Creator Himself and try to discover who does He say you are, or who did He design you to be, and work from natural design.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is very prominent in the world today is the idea of self-determination. Sure. That I can be completely make myself to be whatever I want to be, and that is without any boundaries of society or even biology. Sure. As we come to that, which is a faulty thought. As you pointed out, we have been created. We were designed by God, and so there is a purpose by which we have, and God made us so that we could glorify Him. and that's the purpose. And so we don't just self-determine ourselves and just are not and are not aware of what anyone says or biology or anything. I think you sent me a video, Jabu, and I don't know, it might come in one of our episodes, but it's a guy who joins a queer fat meeting.
Yes, yes,
yes. And this is a guy, is a skinny guy, and he joins this queer fat meeting, and they're like asking why. It's like, well, I identify as a 275 queer pound
queer woman.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so and the thing is, like, we find it ridiculous, but at the same time, in today's, according to that logic, no one can say anything because, well, you actually don't have to prove anyone. I am self-determining myself to be that.
But it really draws back to, I think, the problem with man, and that is, we do have the desire to be autonomous. We have the desire to be our own gods. We have the desire to be God. And so even at the heart of idolatry, when we worship the creature rather than the creator, we worship the creature for what the creature can do for us. And so we realize that, hey, when God doesn't give me what I want, I will just create a God who will give me what I want. And in worshiping this idol, I really am worshiping myself. And so in all of this, pride comes to the surface. And pride then also is the name of a movement where the people of the movement can determine who they are based on how they feel, and regardless of who God has created them to be. And so that's why we come in and we saying, but when you look at natural design, you look at how God so marvelously and so intentionally and so carefully created you to be who you are. And you know, Isaac, I do want to ask you about, you know, we were chatting before the podcast about, you read somewhere about who gave shape to this pride movement. But I think it's worth even just saying before that when you think about the pride and the queer movement and the desire to redefine male and female, you then have this greater problem where I think we spoke about it last week, where there's that image where I was corrected by Cheeto. It wasn't a car; it was a plane, and it's a plane seatbelt. And the beautiful thing about that image was, it actually doesn't work.
Sure.
It doesn't work to have male and male. It doesn't work to have female and female. But it works to have male and female, like a safety belt clips in an aeroplane. And so the problem we have today is there is this push and this forcing to make something work that doesn't work. And what eventually happens from that is you get depression, you get anxiety, you get high levels of stress, you get suicides, because you're constantly fitting yourself in a box where God hasn't created you to be. Whereas these feelings do creep up where you desire that which is not natural. Whereas the solution that we say is go back to the natural, go back to what and who God has created you to be, for there is where you find peace, for there is where you find joy, for there is where you find what actually works. And so maybe, Isaac, take us back to who are the gentlemen, I don't know if there's a woman there, who gave shape to this movement.
Yeah, maybe just to point out, just before I go into that, as you're talking about suicide, I was just trying to find here, because I read that in actual fact, even after when it comes to transgenderism, the suicide rate is way higher.
Sure.
And a lot of them transition in order to, like, oh, it's because I'm struggling, I'm in the wrong body, or whatever. Sure. But after the transition, that doesn't go away. And then lots of people try to blame those suicides on bullying, but it is not actually true. So, but maybe to quickly mention, and we are going to put the link of this article in the description. By the way, one of the members of our church sent me this link, and so I do want to say, you guys that are listening to us, I know we've had some people sending us things, and we appreciate that. It's helpful. And so a member of our church sent me this article called "The Scandalous Seven," which basically give are the seven kind of men that gave birth to the ideology of the LGBTQ. And I'm just gonna quickly mention them and what are some of the thoughts of today. Where did it come from? So Alfred Kinsey, he was the first to argue that sexuality is fluid and gender is non-binary, and this is in 1948. I mean, this is quite a long time ago, and and the way that he did this was actually to interview sex offenders and pedophiles, and so he saw monogamous heterosexuality right, as oppressive. And so he was the first one to kind of give this idea of gender non-binary. The other man was Wilhelm Reich, who was the one that coined the term sexual revolution and promoted, if it feels good, do it. And he also viewed the monogamous heterosexual sex as an evil relic of religion. Then Michael Foucault, and I'm sure people would have heard that name. He is considered the godfather of queer theory, and he advanced the idea that heteronormativity is a power structure that must be deconstructed by the pursuit of subversive sexual identities and pleasures. And for me, it was so interesting as I was reading through this, is the and this is 1976, and yet today this is the language that you're hearing about deconstruction and the norms and the oppressor reality. Harry Benjamin in 1966, he championed the dogma that the mind of the transsexual cannot be adjusted to the body. We must adjust the body to the mind, and making him a forefather of gender ideology and reassignment surgery. John Money coined the term gender identity and believed gender was a mere social construct. Isn't that what we hear today?
Sure.
And purely subjective phenomena, promoted and practiced hormone treatment and gender reassignment surgeries for children. And this is one of the most perversive things, that it actually, in actual fact, it angers me, because adults doing the perversions that their mind and their sinful desires want, it's one thing, but to impose this on children and the long lasting effect of this, it's wicked. Jean-Paul Sartre, sorry man, you can hear my French. How's my French?
It's horrific.
Hey,
so what's the name again?
Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre. See, we don't have our fact checker today, so but he's talking about what you're actually talking about. Hey, in terms of self-determination, he argued that man is nothing else but what he makes himself.
Sure.
The existentialist doctrine of subjective self-definition that forms the philosophical foundation of today's transgender and queer theories. Wow. That idea of self-determination. And this is 1957. And then last one, Jacques Derrida. He inspired queer theory by deconstructing language as an oppressive power play. He, she, man, woman are false binaries, tools of subordination. We must disorganize the inherited order by trashing such binaries. And this is 1967. So I'm not going to mention how all of this, what these men also did and how they died, because many of them are actually, yeah, in a sense they were living what they were talking about, and it the consequences of that was evident. But many of them push for pedophilia and all that. So these ideas, these are the very basics, the basis for the ideology that we see in Pride Month. Wow. And I did want to mention this because just know, for Christians that are maybe sympathetic to these things, to this idea or to the LGBT community and idea, just know of this is not in a vacuum. There is all of this behind. There is all of this history behind, and it is not pretty.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as you were speaking, my mind was drawing the cycle of you have an ideology that okays pedophilia, and this ideology of the LGBTQ plus community, and then I mean, have you watched some of the parades? There's nudity, there's children watching, there's all forms of gross immorality, and what you're having is an ideology which okays pedophilia, and then when the act of pedophilia happens, you get the victim who grows up, and because there was this act of pedophilia done against them, they then become part of the LGBTQ plus community, and then they also advocate for gay rights and so on. And within the gay rights, they are going against pedophilia because they're a victim. But within the ideology, there is the stream that okays pedophilia, because that statement, if it feels right, do it.
If it is subjective, if it is about even in the sexual revolution, about if it's good, if it feels good, who's to say no?
Wow.
And any kind of repression is oppressive, is it's evil, and so it's about freedom. But in actual fact, where is there a line? In that ideology, I don't know if you can consistently draw a line where that's not okay. In a sense, everything goes.
I mean, the scariest thing is you have the world saying that a 10-year-old can decide if they're a male or a female.
Yeah.
How do you give such a huge responsibility to such a young soul? I mean, we might as well let them vote. If they can decide, such. I think the point I'm trying to get to is you're making a 10-year-old make a decision based on what they've seen and the bubble that they're living in, and the rock that they're living under. That once they hit 18 and that bubble is burst and that rock is removed, and they now decide that they actually want to be who they were born to be, but you've mutilated them, and he can't be a man again because he's been mutilated, and now it's what really breaks my heart is we've allowed for this to go as far as children not being protected, and I mean for years we would protect children from ideologies that just seem to cause them harm. But we are moving towards an age where there's no longer protection for even the little ones.
And they actually don't see some of the inconsistencies. I saw this video of a guy going to interview on campus, some of this more liberal campus, and I said, "Oh, can a child do a tattoo?" Like, no, it's too permanent. Can they do a gender change? Like, yeah, I think they should have the right. I'm like, what? Can you not see the inconsistency of that? How a tattoo, yes, that's going to be permanent for the rest, but something much bigger, like a gender operation, and for the rest, but you're okay with that? Like, man, that is crazy.
So talking about the world, I think it's fair to say that if you've watched Hollywood, you would have noticed an influx of just the movement and its ideologies in every show that you watch.
Right.
I mean, for example, I haven't watched it yet, but I heard that in Buzz Lightyear, there's a gay character.
Yeah.
There's you think of storylines that don't match the agenda. Like, just if you think just artistically, the agenda has no business in the storyline, but because of the world's narrative, they found a way, or they find ways to constantly squeeze it in and enforce it into everything that you watch and you listen to. And so I did a bit of research in terms of South African media, because I myself remember growing up and we weren't allowed to watch certain shows because some of them had cussing, and some of them were talking about real life issues that my parents didn't want us to be exposed to. So, like a husband and a wife, or a husband abusing his wife, or there was murder on a show, or there was just like, the husband cheating on his wife, those type of shows. We weren't allowed to watch that. But then I remember when I think I was in primary, man, and I remember seeing for the first time two men kiss on television.
Oh, wow.
And I remember the shock to my system. Because I still grew up in a world where seeing two men kiss was still taboo.
Yeah.
It was unnatural. It wasn't normal. If you've been following us on Tab for a while, you'd have heard us say on a previous episode that when we used to play soccer, I shared this illustration about myself, that there was a point in time where I was playing soccer, and then I bumped into this guy as we were playing, and our lips kissed. And I remember, and that's why I still remember today, because it was like, oh my goodness, what on earth? And I remember running and
it
going,
haunts you till today, bro.
I remember both of us instinctivly were the game stopped for us. We couldn't look at each other. We ran separate directions. We went to like wash and again, I'm not saying this mockingly. I'm saying this that this to us was a normal response. Like two guys don't kiss. That's how we grew up. We grew up being taught that no, boys don't kiss boys. Boys kiss girls. But don't kiss girls until you're married. But it was like, that's what we knew. That's what we grew up being taught. But let me read for us just what started happening in media. All right. So it was a research paper that indicated that many feel there's no sufficient coverage generated about the LGBTQI sector. When asked to comment generally on coverage of the journalists and organizations interviewed, over half of them, which is 55.17% of the respondents, indicated that there was a lack of or a limited amount of coverage. Now, this research was a little bit dated. If you are studying research and you are a Christian, please do some Christian research in South Africa, because a lot of our research is dated. I can already tell you that this 55% has probably dropped, because we have so much more coverage of LGBTQ plus shows and TV just around. All I have to say is Sumizi, and you already know who he is, and in your mind you have an idea of what he represents. Now, anyway, he goes on to say very little can increase. 55% of the respondents indicated that there was a lack of or limited amount of coverage. Very limited can increase with good advocacy. The only time you can really expect homosexuality to be covered is when annual gay pride comes around. And although their displays are necessary, I feel the media can only cover them because of the generally comical and unthreatening way in which homosexuality is explored. And so before we saw an outcry that we need more, we need more, we need more, it was the outcry was heard, and there has been a change. Now, some older folk will remember these shows. Some of these shows are ancient. You are probably still in Brazil when these shows were out in South Africa. But the first one was Zero Tolerance. Now, this was a show that was on South African television. Now, Zero Tolerance was really a wonderful and well-produced drama, but my interest in it, if I'm being honest, was twofold. Zero Tolerance also featured a lesbian couple played by, I won't say who these guys are. Her relationship with Siddiqa on the show was complicated, fascinating, and real, and one that I have not seen portrayed on local television yet. Before Henley and Siddiqa on-screen relationship, another SABC2 drama series called 32 Honey Street broke barriers for the gay community when it featured an on-screen kiss between Juliana and Casey, albeit during a heavily censored scene. The year was 1999. Sure. Yizo. Now, a lot of people know the show, paved the way. Now, writing about the history of gay kisses on South African television, Cameron Mudisane, who's the writer of this article, points out the repercussions that a prison rape scene featured in Yizo season 2 of the educational youth drama Yizo had. The scene set tongues wagging in Parliament, where a number of MPs called for the program to be banned due to the homosexual nature of the episode. It all started by a prison scene, bro,
Sure.
where they were showing the realities of what was happening in prison, where prisoners were being raped. Now, we know this has happened for years in prisons. And Yizo showed that live on air. And I'm ashamed to say, this was the show where I saw two men kiss for the first time.
Sure.
Almost 2 decades ago, Yizo started a viral conversation about the difference between sexual violence and consensual sexual relationships between people of the same sex. Yizo 3 elaborated on that theme. So season 2 was the prison scenes. Season 3, we now get gay couples. And will forever be first prime time representation of a loving relationship and a kiss between two gay men, as more than 5 million viewers watched this episode in question on SABC1, June 2004.
Sure.
Mudisane recalls that the relationship between Tiza and Tabang was also the first he had seen portrayed on national television. After 21 years, Isidingo, now this is another show on SBC3, still graces the scenes. You can see this article is also dated, of local Sophie buffs. And this series has been instrumental in bringing gay characters into the living room of viewers. Grappling to reconcile religious beliefs and sexuality came to the fore for Rhythm City's Stone, played by Zenzo Ngobo, in 2008. Now, do you notice from 1998 to 2004 to now we're at 2008? The backlash to Generation's inclusion of a gay couple, do you remember the name? Senzo and Jason, showed that the idea of two black men in love still didn't sit easily with viewers of South Africa's most popular soap in 2009. Now that, I remember that very clearly.
I can see some heads nodding here in the studio,
because it shook the reality of what we knew as normal.
Sure.
So Generations, many of us watched Generations, whether legally or illegally. So that means whether our parents allowed us to or whether they were away and we were watching Generations. And Senzo and Jason really shook up what we understood as gay couples, because this was now in our faces every night, Monday to Friday.
Sure.
Senzo and Jason showed that the idea of two black men in love still didn't sit easily with viewers of South Africa's most popular soap in 2009. Generations The Legacy, which is the remake, would push the boundaries even further in 2016 by featuring a transgender character in Wandile. This would also be the first time a transgender character was featured in a local soap opera. Now, what I want us to know about South African TV is even our South African soapies and what we would term sitcoms, there's what they call edutainment. And so a lot of the shows we would watch, the writers had in the back of their minds the desire to educate.
Yeah.
And so you're watching Yizo Yizo, and Yizo Yizo, the intention was to sort of scare young people away from crime and the life of gangsterism, because the end result of that would be you would be one of those guys, Papa Action or Chester. You know, you'd end up either dead or you'd be in prison. And if you're in prison, these are the realities of prison. And so you don't want to get involved in this. But in the edutainment space, you then find there's actually a lot of pushing of certain agendas where, as they continue with edutainment, we are now being taught that this is okay. The latest youth program that came out was called Sugar, and this was on MTV. Programs like MTV Sugar play such a crucial role in informing the youth and helping them realize they are not alone. It's about edutainment.
Sure.
So you are not alone. You are not gay alone. There are others who are like you, who are struggling to come out of the closet, and they have come out of the closet and they are okay. So you too come out of the closet.
Sure.
Edutainment, media, subtly desensitizing us to what was previously known as taboo and now is actively accepted on our TV screens. From Senzo and Jason, which appeared occasionally, to now every show, okay, let me not say every show, almost every show that you love and every show that you watch has a gay person in it.
And the thing is, they have been very intentional in slowly desensitizing you to you know, from this is not right to
This
that's
is normal.
expected. It's normal,
Yes.
you know. I mean, and even with the whole sexuality scene is also been like that. I remember growing up, you know, when people started kissing and then the camera would like move away.
Yes.
You know, it will like that was it. They will start kissing, then it will move away. It wouldn't stay on the.
Do you remember how awkward it was for you to be sitting with your parents and a kissing scene came on? And it was just like, and I mean, it was just a peck. They just, and you would like look for where's the remote? But now,
it doesn't stay just on the start. It just you know?
And what's unfortunate is it's also being normalized that kids with their parents will watch the whole scene unfazed. Yeah. Because this is now normal. It is normal to watch this. It is normal for this to happen, and it is normal for us to consume it. Maybe one last thing, Pinto, before we move to Alistair Begg, I got some stats from Hollywood. It says out of 775 series regular characters on broadcast TV, 11.9% of them are LGBTQ, making 92 characters with an additional 49 in recurring roles. And then so that's broadcast TV. And then they looked at streaming TV. The streaming services analyzed this year expanded from Amazon to Netflix to Hulu to include Apple TV, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Paramount, and Peacock as well. On these platforms, there were 358 LGBTQ plus regular and recurring characters and representation of LGBT people from ethnic minorities, including 49%. Streaming services also surpassed broadcast TV and cable networks in portraying transgender characters, with 26 trans characters, triple the number of characters appearing on either broadcast or cable in streaming shows, according to the report. In total, there were 42 regular and recurring transgender characters tracked across all three platforms, up from 29 last year. In a year, we moved from 29 to 42.
Wow.
Now, what makes this bad is because because of the agenda, your show must have a black woman. It must have a black character, and it must have a person who is gay. Now, because some directors don't want to do this and have to do it, do you know what eventually happens?
They put it all in one.
most of your gay people are black men.
Wow.
Your shows have just random black gents.
Mm.
And I'm like, but what? Not all black, not all black men are gay. But to fit it in, you have a lot of black men who are portrayed as gay. Now why does this matter? Malachi grows up watching Netflix, and his idea of a man is a gay man.
Sure.
Because that is what is constantly shown to him. And so it is slowly fading where the a man works, a man takes care of his family, a man is manly, a man is strong, a man is a protector. That is almost shunned on. In fact, it's called some of it is called toxic masculinity. Women can take care of themselves, whereas I want my son to be a gentleman. I want him to want to take care of women, to want to protect women, to want to be manly and fix things. And I want him to be that. But unfortunately, if all Malachi did, which is not what he does, is watch TV, then he will eventually be introduced to a plethora of men who are not masculine but are feminine.
Yeah, I think that I think the problem is the push for the ideology. It is not that we are denying that homosexuality exists. Yeah. In fact, I watched a movie, I don't know, a while back, but it was talking about, I think it was the beginning of the computer, and one of the creators, not computer, it was something else. Okay, anyways, it was one of the inventions that we use, but historically the guy was a homosexual, and in fact, they tried to it was a crime back then in England and all that. But the movie shows the history of that, and so this as I was watching, I was like, it's uncomfortable, but this was what happened. It wasn't it wasn't pushed. It wasn't forced.
Yes.
This is historic. So it's not that we deny that homosexuality is all around us. The problem is the edutainment.
Yes.
Because you're trying to push that agenda and desensitize us to say that if it is normal, and what the Bible speaks is not normal. Romans 1 speaks about the unnatural desires. It's not natural. It's unnatural. But tell us about, some of us are probably familiar with what happened a couple of months ago, and a question of that Alistair Begg responded to. Maybe you can clarify that.
So Alistair Begg was being interviewed, and in an interview he shared about how in a counseling session with a gran, he mentions to the grandma that she can attend her grandson's gay wedding. It was a son. Hey,
what ain't the? I think
it was a
son.
How is our fact checker? It was a son.
Yeah.
And so Alistair Begg said to her she can go, but her gift should be a nicely wrapped Bible for the two of them. And this sparked outrage.
Yeah.
Alistair Begg was on the Shepherds Conference. He was supposed to be speaking there, and everyone was saying that he should be pulled off. I think he was eventually removed from speaking. A lot of podcasts were talking about how Alistair Begg is out of order. Alistair Begg has finally come out as a false teacher. Alistair Begg should be cancelled. He should be removed. In fact, a lot of people were making jokes about him. If you weren't taking a stand, they were saying, "Oh, you're pulling an Alistair Begg." So it became.
I didn't heard about that.
It became so big that people who respected Alistair Begg for years just turned on him in a moment because of that comment.
Yeah.
And so he then I think it was the next week. he preached a
A
sermon,
sermon, yeah.
just clarifying his position and double downing on the advice that he gave to her. And Isaac has actually watched it recently.
Yeah.
And do you remember part of what he said?
Yeah, I thought it was good, and he basically said there were a couple of takeaways for me in his response to all of this. He basically said that this was in a specific context. He was not doing a blanket statement that Christians should attend gay weddings. There was a context that he was giving a counsel to a grandmother who is very concerned of losing the relationship with the grandson. Also mentioning that it was his advice was the grandson would expect the grandmother to reject him, to be away from him, and not to show any kind of love. And his counsel was on the basis of, if you do what is unexpected in loving, even though this is not what you affirm, this is not what you accept, does he know your position? I think in the actual question, I think he expressed that the grandson knows that she was not in favor of that. He also made a point that he didn't grow up with the American fundamentalism.
Yes.
Which I thought that is, I think he has a point.
Yeah.
And we hear a lot about American stuff, and he said I grew up with
maybe for someone who has no idea what American fundamentalist mentality is. How do you describe it to like a lay person?
I think I would describe it in blanket statements without nuance. So in arts, when you are, everything is completely black and white, and there is never a space for nuance and things like that. And he mentions that he grew up with Lloyd Jones and
more
British evangelicalism, and he was saying that he assumed that people would have looked at his ministry, at his sermon series when he preached on Romans 1, and he even mentioned, I wish they had shown the clip of when he was in a university and said that someone could only have sex in a marriage context between a man and a woman, and there was a huge walkout. And and then he was saying, I wish people would have seen that, and that he was not compromising on the truth, and that basically one of the last things, and I'll pass it back to you, is that he was saying, making the point of, what does loving look like to those people? What does loving your enemies, as the Bible tells? Because in a sense, they see Christians as enemies. They don't agree, and we don't agree with the way that they behaving, and so. What does that look like? And for many Christians, even as I was thinking about it after watching the video, it's like, and he, I think, mentioned in the sermon, is it just ignoring? Is that loving? Or just saying, they there, me here, no contact? Is that loving? Is that what it looks like? And so those were some of the points that he made in kind of qualifying what he had mentioned.
I think it's important because it's so easy to have a a theological position on issues until the issue is in your home.
Right.
Your brother is gay, your son is gay.
Yeah.
Much
harder.
Your father is gay.
Yeah.
I've seen people who have held strong positions soften them because it's now in the home. I don't know what to do. It's my son. What do you want me to do? And so I think that there needs to be an active thinking of what does loving them to Christ actually look like. I think for me, so for me, Alistair Begg is not cancelled.
No.
You can cancel me for not cancelling him, and I'll say I'm happy to cancel you too. But he's not cancelled. I've listened to his ministry, and I know his stance on homosexuality, and I think I can agree with him that I also didn't grow. Well, I actually did. I grew up with an American fundamentalist. It was actually
You're
strong.
deep into it, bro.
Because I was
what
KJV.
are you talking about?
I was KJV only tie wearing. Bro, I was I was in there. So, but
those eyes shine for a little bit there. I'm worried now.
Those were some good days. But I think the point I'm trying to make is, when you listen to the guys in the States and you develop strong convictions and you just mirror what they're saying without really thinking about, but holistically, how can I apply this or how can I apply these passages in my life and in my context here, and with the beauty of the objectivity of Scripture. Now, I'm not saying we must now be subjective, that there are some parts of Scripture that are true for me, they're not true for him. No. But I am saying that Alistair Begg's counsel, I would disagree with him. But I'm happy to disagree with him and still think he's not a heretic.
Right.
Because in his counsel, I'm sort of understanding pastorally where he's listening to this old lady who has a genuine love for her grandson.
Yeah.
And in her genuine love, she has expressed her strong views against what he's about to do and what he is doing.
Yeah.
But she has a genuine concern of losing him as a grandson, and I've seen it a lot in parents as they grow older. Just thinking parents, when a child moves overseas, and now there's this sense of, they don't feel abandoned, but they feel abandoned. If that makes any sense, my children have gone away, and then they have children overseas. There's that feeling of I've been left, and now I'm thinking of this grandma who's in this space, and she really loves her grandson. She really wants to continue having the opportunity to minister to him. And she's like, what do I do?
Yeah.
And so Alistair Begg says, well, I'd say go, but don't lose your witness when you go. Now, the only reason why I disagree with Alistair Begg is because of what a wedding communicates. I think when you attend a wedding as a Christian, your presence there is in celebration and in agreement of what is happening in those in that ceremony. And the difficulty with a wedding is your presence at a wedding is almost like an amen and amen. You going there saying praise God for what is happening. You are celebrating with the couple. You are thanking God for the couple and the work He's doing through them, and you are there witnessing. What a marriage is supposed to mirror. Christ and the church. Yeah. But now when you're going where it can't be Christ and the church because it's going against the natural design that God has so put in, your presence there confuses your witness. Sure. Which is mainly why I'd say a wedding is probably not the place to do it. Sure. I would have probably encouraged her you can go visit them after they're married. You can continue to attend birthday parties. You can continue to, there's many things you can continue to do. Yeah. But unfortunately, a wedding and what a wedding communicates and your presence there as a Christian does a lot of harm than it does good. And so I would disagree with that counsel that he gave, but I will take what he said and say you must think about your own witness. How if your brother comes out gay, if your friend comes out gay, if your father comes out gay, hey, if your wife comes out gay, how can you using the scriptures love her to Christ without compromising what is true. I think if there's something we must take out of this whole thing is we need to, I said it last week, think about our thinking.
Yeah.
How will you correctly and rightly respond to that?
Yeah. One of our members came to me and he was just sharing how he was feeling uneasy because he was supposed to kind of give a talk at the wedding of a family member, but they were living together before, and it was like, oh, this is, not great, and back to what you're saying, Joe, we need to be thinking carefully about this. I think in the past when I was asked this question, would you go, would you attend? I think I also would not because I am, in my biblical understanding, that is not a marriage, because the Bible defines marriage, and it is between a man and a woman.
Sure.
And even when Melissa and I were doing a premarital counsel to a couple who's actually about to get married this weekend, but and we were talking about how you can see that God designed it this way, and even without the Bible, throughout history, you can see man and woman in a monogamous, relationship and happening. But the Bible defines marriage, and so we ought to be, again, firm in what we believe. But I agree with you. Alistair Begg is a godly man, and we have been very blessed by his ministry. It's not cancelled, and I understand where he's coming from. I think he's also a grandfather, so so I understand. I'm not saying I agree with his counsel in that sense, but it was shameful. It was sad to see the response to him in that way.
I think, and we must bring this to a close now. But I think what's worth noting is there's something that's not healthy in just the culture of celebrity pastors, and maybe this might be a podcast on its own. And we call them celebrity pastors. That would be Alistair Begg, it would be John MacArthur, it would be John Piper, Francis Chan. Regardless of where you stand with these guys are celebrity pastors. And I think members of local churches are more comfortable to seeing an Isaac Pinto, Jabulani Mabega, Charles de Kivid. Those guys. They are fallible men who are like us, are prone to wonder, and so they're not perfect. But I think the danger is because these men some of them are exceptionally gifted. We almost elevate them to almost being inerrant.
Sure,
these guys can't make any mistakes. I mean, I've heard how godly men I respect talk about some of these pastors. And I'm like, whoa, he's not that perfect. He's got mistakes. He's sinful like you and I. And I think we do need to be careful to not elevate them far beyond where we should. We should, give praise to God for how He works in and through them. But I think we need to see them as they are. Men who are finite men, who have been gifted by God, His Spirit, with this gift of teaching. They're able to teach the word well, but they also are prone to wander and errant. And so maybe to close, I wanted to just close by reminding our listeners that there is nothing new under the sun. Some of the pushback that theologians, liberal theologians, have against the Christians who are against the homosexual community is that the word homosexuality is a new word. But I want to remind us that that it doesn't matter even if we both agree that we can argue, we can push back against that notion that homosexuality is a new word, but we want to say that from the Old Testament we see that the act was seen as taboo, But I want to kick us. I mean, we read Leviticus the last time we here, but I want to remind us of what happened with Lot. And it said, and they called to Lot, and they said, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them to us that we may know them. Judges chapter 19, verse 22 to 23. Read Judges chapter 19. This passage is so scary. We don't have time to unpack it, but just read what happens there. It says in 22, as they were making their hearts merry, so what happens is an old man who's coming into town. He's about to go do some ministry, and he's going through Gibeon. And some Gibeonites invite him into their home, and now they host him. And it says, behold the man of the city, behold the men of the city, worthless fellows, surround the house, beating the door. And they said to the old man, the master of the house, bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him. Yeah. And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, no, brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since the man has come into my house, do not do this vile thing. Already then it was considered detestable. Already then it was a taboo. Already then it was vile. Already then it was wicked. In verse 24, he offers his concubines and his daughters, and they practically rape his concubine and his daughters. Yeah. You then go to Romans chapter 1. We know this passage. Therefore, God gave them up to the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to dishonoring their bodies among themselves. Men, likewise, gave up the natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameful acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. In Jude chapter 7, again, we hear about Sodom. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal power. And then I'll end with 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9. Or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. God has designed us to be male and female in his own image. And so he desires that male and female enjoy this marriage covenant, which is also a gift from God, by the way. We enjoy it together within a monogamous relationship of male and female. And so anything that goes against that is not natural, goes against natural design. And so like that image of the seatbelts, it just doesn't work.
Yeah. So I hope that this episode has been helpful to you. And as we dug a little bit into the history, where it came from, how it's happening, the influence of it in television in South Africa, and even addressing some of, like, maybe just careful thinking. Avoid just jumping into just feeling, I think, with the sense of pride. Sure. Ironically, Sure. But remember God's forgiveness to you and grace. And so while you stand firm on the truth of God, remember you have been forgiven much. Sure. And so you ought to love much. And what does that look like in our context, in your family, in colleagues, friends that are struggling with this? Without compromising, and yet showing the love of Jesus very clearly with compassion. May the Lord give you wisdom, and I hope that it's been helpful.
Sure. And like Chan enjoys us saying, later.